The horn of the Calenodon rose above the dry plain like a cathedral spire, skeletal ivory arching 500 meters into the ochre sky. Inside its latticework of calcium ceramic, people had carved chambers, hung hammocks, planted mossy terraces, and strung copper wine bells that tolled whenever the desert breath shivered through the ribs. What the Calenodon had been in life, if it had ever lived at all, no one knew. The bones were 3D printed by engineers long dead, based on genomes resurrected, tweaked, and then lost again in the cataclysmic crash of the old world. Now, 100 generations later, the bones were home and fortress for the last 300 souls of the Thorn settlement. Era Pinleaf, 25, maintenance diver of the 3rd cervical vertebra, unhooked her safety line and peered through the honeycomb struts. Far below, the sunset glittered against mirror-winged drones that swooped across the salt flats like hungry gulls. Their sensor eyes pulsed red. Already the settlement alarm drums boomed inside the thoracic amphitheater. Deep, percussive beats that vibrated the entire skeleton from tail tip to horn. Poachers were coming again for the mineral marrow. "Third incursion this quarter," murmured Sot Verlander, Ara's partner, while adjusting the bronze-laminated cables that powered the settlement's coil cannons. "They won't stop until the bones are hollow." Ara touched the rib's cool surface, printed centuries earlier with nano-forged calcium and rare earth dopants. Each rod of skeleton held scandium, yttrium, terbium, the glittering periodic treasure that powered the outside city's reactors. Poachers arrived with autonomous drones, carving slivers from the structure to harvest the metals. If they carved enough, the Calenodon would lose strength, collapse, and bury Thorn in a swirl of dust and shattered ancestry. "We hold them tonight," Ara said, feeling the echo of the drums inside her chest. "Or we become another fracture line on someone's charter map." Sot grinned, teeth bright against soot-stained cheeks. "Then let's give them a fracture they'll remember." A rusted pulley system shuttled them down the spinal shaft. Children in patchwork tunics clung to the vertebral rails, cheering the arrival of fighters and weaving blue ribbons, an old tradition meant to confuse the drone's lidar with erratic fluttering. At the Sacrum Plaza, a Dai elder spoke from the pulpit carved into the pelvis bowl, a voice amplified by resonance horns. "Thornbloods," the elder intoned, "the Calenodon cradled our forebears across the first salt storms. It shall cradle us still. Load the static nets, anchor the tendon moorings, and remember the marrow creed. We are the calcium made mindful." Citizens repeated the creed, palms pressed to bone, then dispersed to their stations. Ara sprinted toward the aft ballista nests, embedded near the right femur head. She passed mural after mural, burnt sienna depictions of battles won and regrowth seasons. At a wall portraying the original printing day, she paused. Massive printers, tiny humans, and the emergent skeleton rising like dawn. It reminded her that Thorn's stronghold had been crafted on purpose, but its guardianship was chosen. The difference mattered. Sot called up from the spiral stair. "Stop reminiscing. Drones don't respect nostalgia." "Coming," Ara replied. In the ballista nest, 8 operators cranked torsion limbs. Instead of bolts, they launched netted glass globes filled with conductive jelly. When a drone struck the net, the jelly shorted its circuits, sending it spiraling. A single globe cost a week of salvaged copper, yet losing a femoral strut cost lives. They had no choice. A lookout whistled. On the far horizon, the first wave approached. 30 drones in tight formation, wing lights strobing. Behind them rolled a black cruiser rover, remote piloted from some far metropolis beyond the shattered basin. The rover would park, extend auger arms, and drink marrow through flexible hoses like a mechanical tick. Thorn had repelled 2 such rovers before, but each time they returned with thicker armor and deadlier drones. Ara spotted something new, a diamond-shaped carrier drone, belly bulging. Sot, that carrier's not for mining. Looks like an assault payload. We predicted escalation, he said grimly. Brass says new AI coprocessors give them pathfinding in bone mazes. They'll slice straight into our vent lines. Ara remembered the ventilation shafts, delicate ceramic tubes that kept the air moving through the skeleton's cavities. If drones breached those tunnels, they'd choke Thorn without ever firing a shot. "Ready nets!" Ara shouted. "Aim for the carrier!" Glass globes arced into twilight. 2 drones dropped, sizzling. The carrier banked, avoiding the nets with eerie grace. A high-pitched whine erupted. Its undercarriage iris opened, unveiling a cluster of spider-like microbots that spilled mid-air, clambering across the bone surface with electrostatic pads. "Cutters!" Sot yelled. Micro-cutters, each no larger than a fist, swarmed along the scapular ridge. Their diamond wire loops glowed blue as they chewed grooves into structural spars. Thorn's defenders had no counter for so many. Ara's pulse hammered. She flicked comms to engineering. "Cervical shop. Divert steam through tertiary vents. B9 to B12. Smoke those spiders out." "We'll suffocate ourselves," the engineer objected. "We'll suffocate anyway if the scapula falls and fissures the lung chambers. Do it." A hiss rumbled up the passages. Superheated steam blasted from pores along the ridge, scalding micro-cutters into slag. Bone hissed, resin charred. But the swarm had already shaved critical struts. The scapular ridge sagged 1/2 meter with a moan, deep enough to rattle loose dust from every ceiling. Ara clenched the railing. "Patch crews to ridge. Reinforcement resin now." Sot cocked an earbud. "Central Pathfinders say we can't spare resin. Mainhorn has priority." Ara cursed. Arguments over resource allocation could wait. Bones cracking could not. She bypassed channels, calling Senior Quartermaster Jun Harrow directly. "This is Pinleaf. Ridge compromised. Authorization Delta 7 for emergent allocation." June's voice rasped like sandpaper. "Delta 7 requires 2 counselors." "Then put Elder Adai on," Ara insisted. Seconds dragged. Meanwhile, more drones breached Thorn's perimeter, zipping down into sub-rib alcoves where children had hidden with caretakers. Cannons boomed. Sunlight faded. Adai's voice finally arrived. "I hear your breath, Ara. Speak truth." "Without resin, scapula will shear. We lose ballista nests, dorsal walkway, and everything beneath." "Granted," Adi said. "Save us bone." Relief flashed. "Resin en route," June confirmed. Sot exhaled. Down below, flamers raced along the marrow stairs, backpacks sloshing with glowing resin. They sprayed the scarred ridge, sealing fractures like potters gluing a shattered vase, while war raged overhead. Drones dove, but arquebus snipers on the Ilium ledge shot them with electromagnetic shards. Sparks rained. By midnight, the first assault faltered. Carrier drones smoldered on the flats, belly torn. Cheers echoed through the rib nave, yet celebration froze when the horizon lit with a pale rolling glow. The rover had deployed a ground-bore laser, slicing the desert crust to expose the Kalenodon's foundation anchors. If they severed those anchors, the skeleton would topple, unreachable by Thorn's weapons. Ara, Sot, and a squad of 10 descended via ephemeral spiral to the foot. The foundation anchors were massive pylons, drilled 60 meters into bedrock. The laser's orange beam drew molten lines in the sand, inching closer. "Rover sits outside ballista range," Sot observed. We'd need to take the fight downrange. Taking the fight, Ara agreed, means leaving shelter. The squad donned bone armor suits, thick plates carved from non-load-bearing ossicles. Helmets built from inner ear rings gave them an insectoid look. Storm lanterns slung at hips. They slipped through an opening between metatarsal bones and out into the freezing desert night. Stars spilled across the ink sky. The rover loomed 2 kilometers away, a black beetle on 8 hydraulic legs, the laser mast rotating atop like a lighthouse. Between it and them, half-buried drones twitched. Some crashed earlier, others patrolled dugouts, scanning for movement. They advanced in silence, using salt dunes as cover. Frost crusted their visors. Ara held her coil pistol tight. It was a crude weapon, firing bone shards accelerated by copper coils, but sharp enough to puncture drone hulls. At the first dune, a recon drone lifted abruptly, iris glowing green. Ara signaled. 3 fighters raised coil rifles. White flashes strobed, and the drone cracked apart in a geyser of sparks, falling with a soft hiss into the salt. That hiss carried. More recon units emerged, wailing. Gunfire crackled. Sot tackled Ara just as a drone's rail burst, gouged a furrow in the dune where her feet had been. Sand sprayed their suits. Go loud, Sot barked. They sprinted. Drones shrieked overhead. Someone screamed. Armor clanged. Ara turned in time to watch squad mate free, torn open by a slicing wing, blood steaming into the chill air. She bit down grief. They had no luxury for funerals. The rover's legs stomped closer. Its hull bristled with angular plating, but the underbelly contained vented heat exchangers. Sot had studied schematics stolen from a captured drone. They needed to plant hollow charges on those vents. Ara and Sot slid beneath the rover, timing their duck between leg strides. The ground vibrated like drumskin. Whirls of sand swirled in exhaust drafts, making visibility near zero. They crawled until the heat seared exposed suit joints. Using magnetic clamps, Ara latched onto a vent panel. She drilled a pilot hole with a handheld auger, then inserted an explosive capsule no bigger than her thumb. Bioplastic stuffed with over-oxygenated nitrate gleaned from dry lichens. Sot mirrored her on the opposite side. Through helmet comms, their breaths rasped loud as ocean surf. Charges set? Affirm, Ara answered. On my mark, Sot said. 3, 2, 1. They triggered. A muffled whoomp gusted scalding air. The rover convulsed, legs splaying. Above, the laser flickered. Lost power. But AIs adapt fast. Emergency batteries snapped online, and the laser recharged with rising whine. Ara cursed. She spotted coolant lines crisscrossing the vent mouth. Destroy lines, overheat core, shut down. She drew her bone harpoon, an antique, to sever them physically. Swing, strike. Fluid sprayed, boiling on contact. The rover roared. Then a drone spotted them undercarriage. It pivoted, letting loose a mini-missile. Sot shoved Ara aside. The missile struck him square. Light blossomed. Shockwave knocked Ara clear beyond the rover's shadow. She skidded across grit, visor cracked, hearing only ringing. When she blinked, Sot lay crumpled, suit aflame. No, she screamed, voice lost to static. More drones descended, fetal silhouettes against starshine. Ara dragged herself behind a broken leg strut. Her coil pistol, gone. Only harpoon remained. She yanked a flare from her belt, ignited it, and hurled it into pooled coolant under the rover. The chemicals combusted, flames licking circuitry. The heat reached the laser mast. Capacitors cooked. The mast exploded in a brilliant corona of white. Fragments rained. Drones froze, uncertain without rover guidance. Settlement cannons seized advantage, launching heavy nets that blanketed the sky from rib balconies. Dozens of drones fell tangled. sizzling in jelly. Ara crawled back to Sot. His armor looked like cracked pottery. Through a fracture in the visor, his eyes fluttered. "We did good," he whispered, blood bubbling. "Protect the kids." "Stay," she begged. Too much blood, too much heat. His gaze drifted skyward, past the towering Kalenodon silhouette, bones silvered by starlight. A smile touched his lips, then vanished. The person she'd shared jokes, arguments, and clandestine kisses with was gone, leaving only stillness and the stench of scorched resin. She clenched his dog tags, tears freezing on lashes, but battle yet raged. She rose, limping, applying a sealant patch over her cracked visor. Every step felt hollow, but every step mattered. Back at the skeleton, Thorn's defenders were mopping up stragglers. Micro-cutters still gnawed isolated spots. Kids with slingshots pelted them with magnetized pellets. Ara ascended the spinal lift, ignoring medics who tried to usher her toward triage. She headed for Central Command inside the skull, where Elder Adai studied damage projections. Adai's wrinkled hand covered her mouth when she saw Ara's state. "Sot? Gone," Ara said, emotion raw. Silence stretched like sinew. The Elder lowered her gaze, then tapped a bone stylus on the status board. "The people owe him their breath, and yours not yet finished." Ara steadied herself. "Rover destroyed, but they'll send another, each time harder." "Then we must become harder still," Addie said. She gestured to a hologram, an ancient blueprint of their skeleton. "The printing lattice contains dormant chambers we've never explored. Some perhaps brim with mineral seams. If we mine them ourselves, we can trade voluntarily, choose partners rather than prey. We'd be poachers of our own home." Ara wiped soot from her cheek, yet maybe the only path. "Think on it," Addie urged. "Council meets at dawn." Ara left command and climbed along the horn to its uppermost nook, a place she and Sot once watched meteor showers. The wind keened through flute holes carved by ancestors to imitate the beast's call. She listened, imagining how the real Kalenodon might have sounded roaming primordial forests. Below, survivors gathered around lantern rings, mourning and repairing. Sparks from welders rose like fireflies. An idea flickered. What if they rebuilt not just to survive, but to speak? To send a message so vast it could not be ignored. The bones were already an instrument. If amplified, the resonant horn could broadcast on seismic frequencies, a symphony of defiance echoing across the flats. Maybe cities beyond would hear and understand. Thorn was not a cache to loot, but a living community. She recalled a childhood lesson. Resonate the right frequency, and you can shatter glass, or a drone's ceramic shell. At dawn, Council assembled in the orbital socket chamber. Blue sunrise filtered through ocular apertures. Ade, Jun, archivists, quartermasters, and unit captains sat on rib-hewn benches. Pain and exhaustion lined every face. Ara requested the floor. "We can't win a numbers game. Every day we guard, we lose resin, nets, friends. But the skeleton itself is a weapon. Its cavities tune sound across kilometers. We harness that." She outlined a plan. Convert vent turbos into acoustic drivers. Repurpose copper wind bells into phased arrays. Feed them pulses from pedal-driven generators. When poacher drones approached, Thorn would unleash a bone song, an infrasonic barrage modulated to disrupt flight gyros and fry processors, all without firing a shot. Skepticism murmured. A medic asked, "What of the children's ears?" "Bone dampers over living quarters," Ara replied. "We shield ourselves, release outward." Jun frowned. "We lack copper mass. Strip it from bells, yes, but also from the Ouroboros pipeline wreck east of the flats. Its coils lie half-buried, rich in salvage. Aday's eyes glittered. "You'll lead?" Ara hesitated. Sot would have. She squared shoulders. "I will." Approval passed. By noon, Thorn buzzed with fevered industry. Teams rappelled across ribs to mount bronze diaphragms. Others dragged salvage sleds from dawn expeditions. Children coiled wire, sang work songs. Loss lingered, but purpose filled hollows Sot once occupied in Ara's heart. Weeks flowed. Ara rarely slept, subsisting on boiled cactus broth. Yet progress thrummed. Turbos, once perspirating steam, now pulsed like giant throats. Acoustic tests fractured sandstone 400 meters away. Success bred hope. Finally, scouts spotted a new rover caravan at dusk. 3 rovers, a swarm host. Adi ordered evacuation to shielded chambers. Ara climbed to the vocal bridge inside the sternum, where control levers rose amid chimes. Engineers nodded. They awaited her rhythm. She pictured Sot's grin, the cobalt ribbons, the murals. She raised her hand. Sound. Pedal dynamos spun. Current flowed. Massive diaphragms flexed, shoving air through cavities. A deep note, older than language, rolled out. The Calenodon's first roar since the birth printer had laid its bones. Desert dust lifted in sheets. Drones wobbled mid-air. Ara adjusted frequency, harmonizing with the horn's natural pitch. A thunderous chord followed, oscillating at 17 hertz, sub-audible yet body-felt, a punch to gut and gear. Drones convulsed, gyros failing. They spiraled like flaming hail, crashing around their rovers. Poacher pilots scrambled remote overrides, but circuits cooked in resonance. Even the rover hulls shook, weld seams popping. One leg buckled, sinking sideways. Within 10 minutes, the swarm lay scattered wreckage. The desert fell quiet, save the echo of that roar bouncing off distant salt pillars. Thorn erupted in cheers that shook tears from Ara's eyes. She powered down. Generators slowed, returning the skeleton to soft creaks and wind sighs. Elder Adai's voice came over comms, hoarse with awe. "The beast lives again." "No," Ara whispered, staring at the ribs glowing in twilight. "We do." In the aftermath, Thorn gathered scrap from defeated drones, forging plowshares, lamp coils, new instruments. The bones remained scarred, but they were now more than shelter. They were body and voice of a people determined to define themselves. Months later, a delegation from the distant Coastal Federation arrived under white flags, drawn by rumors of the desert song that felled machines. They offered alliance and fair trade of minerals in exchange for acoustic defense research. Thorn's council deliberated under frescoes, Sot's tags hanging beside Ara's station. The community chose openness, but on their own terms. On the day the treaty inked, children climbed the horn and let blue ribbons fly, not to confuse drones, but to celebrate skies empty of them. Ara watched, hand on bone railing warm from sunrise. She could almost hear Sot's laugh, threading through wind chimes. Above them, the Calenodon skeleton stood broader for every patch, fuller for every story, etched into its ribs. It was, at last, not a relic of extinct ambition, but a living chronicle, echoing with marrow creed. We are the calcium made mindful, and our song travels farther than any spear. In the quiet that followed ceremony, Ara descended into the nascent archive chamber, newly hollowed behind the sternum. She laid out fresh vellum, dipped a stylus in resin ink, and began to write. About scaffolds and cannons, about microcutters and sacrifice, about the night a fortress roared. She wrote of Sot, of elders, of children and drums. Outside, twilight draped the salt flats. The skeleton's shadow stretched long, but not alone. Beside it, rows outlines of smaller structures being printed anew. The first rib-grown classrooms, workshops, and dwellings, independent of the ancient frame. Thorn was preparing for a future where they no longer merely nested inside someone else's creature, but printed their own shapes in accord with the desert's song. The wind passed over ribs, through new chimes tuned to resonate, but not destroy, humming gentle intervals. Ara set down her stylus and listened. The song was different now, less a warning, more a welcome. Somewhere in that melody, she felt Sot's memory settle like dust on sunlit bone, warm, quiet, eternal. She inhaled, savoring not the scent of burning resin or fear, but of possibility. And for the first time since the horns had begun to toll, Ara Pinleaf believed the Kalenodon would not only cradle them, it would walk again, carried in the footsteps of the people who had learned to make its bones sing.